Hello, everyone. My name is Courtney Carruthers, and I will be your moderator today on our journey through Energy Justice 101. We have a wonderful and fabulous group of panelists here, and we'll begin right now. Just to introduce you to our panelists, we have the great Miss Roshetta Ozain, Dr. Khalil Shahid, and Miss Montina Cole. And I'm going to read you a bit about their backgrounds. Ms. Roshetta Sibley Ozain is the founder, director, and CEO of the Vessel Project of Louisiana, a mutual aid and environmental justice organization supporting the most vulnerable community members with various forms of assistance. She is also co-director of the Gulf Fossil Finance Hub, which advocates for the disinvestment of fossil fuels and the investment of communities. As an internationally recognized environmental justice advocate, Roshetta has spoken globally and champions the rights of marginalized communities for clean environments. Dr. Khalil Shahid is a senior strategist of environmental equity in green finance and economic development at the Natural Resource Defense Council. He has more than 20 years of experience in community and economic justice, organizing, planning, and policy advocacy. Mr. Shahid's work and research focuses on the environmental and urban geographic implications of sustainable cities and the transition to a green economy, including the related emergence of environmental gentrification. At the NRDC, his work centers around federal policies and strategies that can create just solutions for our current environmental and climate issues, specifically by integrating clean energy and energy efficiency with affordable housing and community development. Mr. Shahid has the experience working on equitable, sustainable development efforts in both urban and rural settings, such as in the US, Mexico, India, and Brazil. And last but not least, Ms. Montina Cole, who has practiced energy law for more than 20 years and is the principal and founder of J. Green Consulting, LLC. She has served as the first senior counsel for environmental justice and equity at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, also known as FERC, where she has led the initiative to integrate environmental justice and equity into the agency's work, including the creation of the agency's first equity action plan. As a senior attorney in the Climate and Clean Energy Program at the Natural Resource Defense Council. Cole led the gas pipeline policy advocacy and work and helped lead the initiative to incorporate racial equity considerations into the organization's advocacy work across all programs. She has even served as special counsel to the General Counsel at the U.S. Department of Commerce, where she was a political appointee and on the staff of former U.S. Representative Jim Slattery. Montina Cole is also a 2023 Open Society Foundation's Leadership in Government Fellow. I present to you our wonderful panelists. As we proceed, we're going to ask questions regarding energy justice, energy, renewable energy, and things of that nature. We have a lot to cover, but I do want to save all of your wonderful questions to the end. We'll have about 10 or 15 minutes at the end, so please save your questions for later, and we will get to them as soon as possible. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy. So as we begin, a lot of people don't know much about energy justice, environmental justice, climate justice. It's a bunch. But since we're going to focus on energy justice, I would like to know from each of you, what is energy justice and why is it so important? And with that, we'll be discussing what does it look like and why is it important federally, locally, and economically. So if you all could take one of those, as well as give me your own spin on what energy justice is for you and your community and your experiences, jobs as well. And you'll each get about 3 to 5 minutes to explain. We can start with Roshetta.
Thank you so much, Courtney, and thank you for that great introduction. I am elated to be among such greatness. In the words of Miss Fannie Lou Hamer, Three people are better than one. And I think in order for us to mitigate the problem that we are currently facing, it's going to take all of us. It's going to take frontline community members. It's going to take the federal government. It's going to take local and city officials. It's going to take everybody coming together to develop a plan, and not a cookie cutter plan, but a plan that fits each community individually. And so, as stated, I am Rashetta Sibley Ozan. I'm the founder, director, and CEO of the Vessel Project of Louisiana. And we're located here in Southwest Louisiana. Southwest Louisiana is very, it's an area of Louisiana that's not talked about as much as say New Orleans. It's a five parish area. We consist of one of the largest parishes in the world, because parishes only exist in Louisiana, right? So we consist of Cameron Parish. Cameron Parish currently has several LNG facilities, but within Southwest Louisiana, we are surrounded by many fossil fuel extractive industries, and much more pollution. So our community, it has a smell to it like rotten eggs. It tastes like chemicals when you kind of taste the air. The water is poisoned. The air is poisoned. We have high rates of cancer, high rates of asthma, and it is a predominantly Black, low income area, consisting of fishermen and people who are trying to just live off of the resources and the land here as best they can. So when you ask about energy justice looks like identifying those type of communities that are overburdened with the type of things that are contributing to the problem, such as pollution from fossil fuel extractive industries. Identifying those communities as environmental justice communities, right? Because their environment is being threatened, and understanding what the term environment means, and that it starts with your body. The air you're breathing, the water you're drinking is poison, and that's going into your body and it's putting you in a state where you're not your best. And then your local environment is being poisoned. So you are at an injustice and a disadvantage. But why? Why are these communities so disadvantaged? Well, they're Black, they're low income, and these are the type of communities that have been made sacrifices for these type of industries to come into. So when you talk about energy justice, it refers to the fair distribution of both benefits and burdens associated with these industries. If these communities are going to be overburdened, then they should have over benefits, right? Because it's the equal distribution of it for communities. But what we found is that the communities are overburdened, but they don't see the benefits. They're not getting the funding, they're not getting the resources that they need to survive and thrive. And that starts again with coming to those communities, addressing the problem, identifying those communities, and making sure that the people who live in those communities have a just and equitable seat at the table, and the solutions that they suggest are being utilized, and not just them being there for show, or being the minority person in the room, but they're actually there because they are the closest to the problem, therefore they're closest to the solution.
Thank you. Miss Montina Cole.
Thank you, Courtney. Thank you so much. And let me also say, I'm just very, very pleased to be here with my esteemed panelists. So thank you so much. It's a privilege to be with you, Courtney and Khalil and Rochetta. And thank you for all the participants who are joining us today. I have to tell you, we could just end it right there on what Rochetta said. She just kind of taught us a master class on what energy justice is. But I'm going to just back up a little bit and kind of give maybe more of a textbook definition. But she really has hit the nail on the head. What I'll say is that there are many different types of justices, right? And we're used to hearing environmental justice or climate justice. And the fact of the matter is that energy justice really kind of has grown up out of those movements. And we see energy justice has become a thing because lots of things have happened over time to make this a relevant matter, whether it is climate change and the effects of that, or we're seeing now transitioning to wanting to transition to more of a cleaner economy. or increased siting of polluting energy infrastructure such as gas pipelines and other generating plants and things like that. So as these kind of new things happen, we start seeing things through a different lens, not just environmental justice, but also the concept of energy justice. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that there's, I feel that there's overlaps between these things, and this is how energy justice kind of came up. So energy justice in general, kind of the way I just see it personally, is like a framework or a lens for considering how people are impacted by the energy system, where we seek to ensure that people that are overburdened, that are marginalized, are not unfairly burdened by the energy system. So the effects of how we produce or generate energy, or the effects of how we transport or deliver energy, or the effects of how we use various different kinds of energy. When we talk about looking at things through that kind of lens, how the energy system impacts people, those are the kind of issues that come out of that environmental justice issues arise from that kind of lens. So I think it's important also to understand too how this came up. Because we think about environmental justice, we think about things like gas pipelines, generating plants, so many other types of things. But when we think about energy specifically, it's critical, right? It's critical because we all need energy to live. It's not like it's really optional. It's not like it's really optional these days. We have to be able to power our society, our homes, our businesses, churches, all sorts of places. So it's a very critical thing that we can't do without. Energy, and now I'll get to kind of the textbook part of it. Energy justice is often described as having four different pillars or components. So again, there's the general concept of we're looking at things through a particular lens, the effects of the energy system, but then how does that break down into, what's the components of that? And a lot of time we will see, maybe it's whether it's scholars or, policy advocates or whomever that have this kind of concept of breaking it down into categories, but I think it's a helpful way to look at it because we can begin to see in a more granular way how it really manifests. And I think Rochetta really, gave some good examples of that, which I'll mention as I go through the four parts. But one component of energy justice is said to be distributive justice. When we talk about distributive justice, what we're talking about is a kind of fair or equitable distribution of benefits and burdens. And we heard, again, Rochetta talk about this. And so the kind of questions you're going to ask when you're looking at it through that lens is, who is it that's bearing the brunt of the burden? Who is it that's getting the most benefits of the energy system, or who is receiving the brunt of the burdens of the effects, the negative effects of the energy system? So when we're looking at things through that kind of distributive lens, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about distributive justice. A second component of energy justice is termed recognition justice. And there, when we're talking about recognition justice, we're talking about recognizing that, first of all, recognizing communities to begin with, right? But also recognizing that communities are different. Our communities are not all the same. We're not a monolith, right? We can't all be treated the same because we have different talents and gifts that we bring. We have different forms of vulnerabilities that we bring too. So it's about making sure that we truly see communities, really recognize them for who they are, and appreciating, all the different things about them. It's a way to also recognize that their rights to self-determination. So recognition justice. A third pillar or a third component of energy justice is spoken of as being procedural justice. And we're talking about procedural justice, we're talking about making sure that there's a fair, equitable process that reflects meaningful participation by impacted communities. And just like, again, like Rochetta said, not just about kind of just seeing that, I got my Black person there, my minority person there, I can check that box. It's not just about just saying I can count that I had some minorities in the room. No, you want to make sure that there's a meaningful participation by those who are actually impacted by the effects of the energy system. Then you're going to be asking questions like, who is at the table and what voice and what power do they have in influencing planning and influencing decision making and influencing implementation of energy policy. So it's a very meaningful concept when we're talking about procedural justice. Then lastly, the fourth pillar that's often talked about is this concept of restorative justice, restorative justice. So from that lens, we're talking about fixing the problems, fixing the adverse effects of the energy system. Whether we do that through some sort of policy making procedure at some sort of a state commission or at the FERC. We're thinking about how do we rectify past injustices that have been caused by the energy system and prevent future harms. Maybe or harms that are simply caused by policy making, bad policy making. It can be as dramatic as how do we remedy the effects of an oil spill or a gas explosion or dam projects that may have been built in the past that is having negative impacts. That's about the concept of fixing what has already happened that's been adverse. How do we rectify it? So those are the four pillars that are often talked about, the four kind of concepts that are within the overall concept of energy justice. And the last thing I'll say about it too, real quickly, is that there are other ways that people also describe these components of energy justice. Like some people say, well, one component is energy democracy, and sometimes that means the same thing as procedural justice. Sometimes people may have more than four components. Maybe they will have five. But the bottom line is, they're all can be encapsulated in what I just described. And it's all about having this kind of lens when we're talking about energy justice. What are the effects of the energy system?
Thank you. Dr. Khalil Sheet, it's your turn.
Thank you, everyone. And first, again, thank you, Courtney and everyone at UMD for inviting me and allowing me to be a part of this session. And I apologize to everyone. I'm not in a better space to be able to be a part of this conversation, but I had unexpected changes in scheduling. But I'm here with you and just looking forward to being a part of this conversation going forward. And thank you, Montina, who's one of my heroes, and Rochetta, who's one of my inspirations. I'm from South Louisiana also, and I've been following her work, and I've never had a chance to actually be on a panel with her, actually speak to her directly. So I'm looking forward to hearing about this. And again, and just as Montina said about Rochetta's piece, I want to ditto what both of those women said. And I will kind of shift the focus a little bit on thinking about energy justice towards what do we as a people, as a community, want to do with our agency in the way that we relate to justice. And I'll open that by starting with a story of one of my heroes from the civil rights era, Ella Baker. And for those who are familiar with Ella Baker, or those who are not familiar with Ella Baker, I should say, she was the organizer of the civil rights movement. She trained the activists, trained the organizers, trained SNCC, built the NAACP, built the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. During her tenure with the NAACP, the member roll of the NAACP increased 4 times over. Because she trained those organizers to go into those communities and bring people in to this movement. And one of the things that she was very interested in was not just organizing and mobilizing for the sake of mobilizing, but mobilizing and organizing for the sake of building communities and building alternatives to the Jim Crow economy that many of our communities were stuck in and suffering from. And there was one story about a community, I cannot remember the name of it, but it was in Mississippi that she was organizing with and trying to organize. But the people in this community were reluctant to join into the civil rights movement because they had an economic relationship with a segregationist white town near them. And one of the key bases of that economic relationship was that they were dependent on this white community for ICE, for their homes and for their businesses in their community. And we have this glorified history of the build out of the electric grid in this country and the role of rural electric cooperatives in self-organizing in rural communities across this country to build out the grid in those spaces where utility companies did not want to go because they didn't perceive an economic benefit for them to build out to these sparsely populated rural communities. But what we often miss in that story is the fact that many rural Black communities were still the very last to be connected to that grid. And that impacted the way that they were able to grow economically and the way that they were able to compete economically against other communities that were connected to the grid, such as in this case with this community in Mississippi that Ella Baker was trying to organize. The reason why this community didn't have ICE is because they were not connected to the grid. They couldn't produce their own ICE. And so what she did was she created an ICE cooperative amongst this community, they got power. They were able to create ice, and that freed them from this economic dependence on this segregationist community and allowed them to advocate for their own interests through participation in the civil rights movement. And so the lesson for me in that story is, and of when we combine all the different approaches and frames and thinking about energy justice that Montina and Roshetta put forward, what that then means is, what do we with our agency want to do with the energy that we control? Once we do control it, once we are able to participate as equals in this energy economy, what do we do? How does access to energy, control of energy, the production of energy in our communities allow us to liberate ourselves and to choose our own path forward in how we want to develop and build our and build our communities. So to me, that then is the final phase of what energy justice means, and where we ultimately want to go, and what this opportunity that we have today, where we're transitioning from fossil fuels to renewable energy, allows us to imagine in ways that we were not able to imagine it under the fossil fuel economy, because we are building out new energy infrastructure, new transmission lines, et cetera. And so this really gives us an opportunity to think forward, to think with vision, and to think with agency. What do we want to do within our communities with the energy that we control, that we access, and that we produce? Thank you.
Thank you all so much for your answers. Um, we've gone into a lot, and your answers each like introduce something more vital that we have to pick apart. One of the things that we find in the Black and Brown communities and lower income communities is lack. So if one of you or all three of you could give me your own definition of a, I guess maybe new word, new phrase, very interesting, which is called energy desert. It may be commonly used in the energy space, but I would love for our onlookers and our audience to know what energy desert is moving forward, because it's something that's a prevalent term that should be used and something that's commonly happening throughout these communities. We'll start with Roshetta.
Thank you so much for that question, Courtney. When we think about the word desert, we think about something that's lacking life, or we think about, something that's missing. It's obsolete. It's not there. Right. But when you think about these communities, and one of the reasons why I said we have to go to these communities and actually see for ourselves, we just can't listen or hear or believe it. We have to actually go to the communities and see, because what they're making people believe who don't live in these communities are that communities have an abundance of resources. They have the things that they need, right? So, for example, in my community here in Southwest Louisiana, we are surrounded by billion-dollar industries that produce all sorts of things, from chlorine tablets to gas to oil, LNG, which is liquefied natural gas, which is produced to make energy, but it's causing pollution, it's polluting the air and the water. So when you come to this community, if you're not talking to the people, you might say, "Oh, they're surrounded by all of this. They have to have everything that they need. Oil and gas is being made here. Billions of dollars are coming through here. These facilities must be hiring these people, and they have to, have the resources. The schools must be the best schools in the world. The teachers have to be making money." And you would assume this just by seeing this, or by seeing on paper that this is what exists here. When we talk about desert and depletion and obsolete and things not being there, that you learn these things by talking to the people. Right now, here in Southwest Louisiana, in communities surrounded by billion-dollar industries, we are prepared for a hurricane. We are under a tropical storm warning. And people are on edge. They have PTSD from previous storms. People haven't recovered from storms that have happened. If you come here, you'll still see blue tarps on roofs. You'll still see houses that have boarded up windows. People who haven't returned here since hurricanes because they didn't have the resources that they need. Our grid is also not up to par, because with these type of storms, As soon as it rains or there's some thunder and lightning, we lose electricity. We lose our gas from center point energy. So if you look at it, you might think, you know, they have everything that they need there. You may not see that desert when you're looking at it, but the term itself, the definition means that this community does not have that. This area does not have this thing. It does not exist. Now, that may not be a good term to use because deserts are full of life and things that have learned to live in the desert, right? There's life in the desert. But when you look at the communities that are termed energy deserts, it's because those communities don't have adequate resources, adequate funding, adequate access in that community. It is a facade put up. It's like being in a desert. You've heard, think an illusion. You think you see water because you've been in the desert so long and it's not actually there. It's the same thing with these communities. You see these industries and you think, oh my goodness, they have everything that they need. They can't be struggling. And on paper, those industries say, we're going to provide these resources, we're going to provide economic development, we're going to provide jobs. But once again, when you come down to the communities and you talk to the people who live there, you find out that they don't have resources, they don't have access, they don't have the things that they need. It just does not exist in these communities. And this is the first step to us achieving justice, is to understand that this is real life. This is what's happening in the communities. And in order to understand it, we have to go to the communities and talk to the people because we will continue to see an illusion of abundance. And I'll end with this. Just recently on the front page of the paper, it said that, you know, I think FEMA named Lake Charles, Louisiana as like the most resilient city or something. FEMA just came up with a definition for resilience, and they gave that badge of honor to Lake Charles, Louisiana. Well, on Saturday, we just imploded our largest building that we had here in Lake Charles. It was destroyed by Hurricane Laura and Delta, and it was imploded on Saturday, so it no longer exists. Our bridge, which is the I-10 bridge, has been listed as the most dangerous bridge in the world because it is more than 30 years past the date it was supposed to be reconstructed. We still have several citizens who are living in FEMA trailers. We still have several citizens with boarded up homes with tarps on their roofs. We just did from Vessel Project, my organization, a food giveaway where we gave out food to over 200 people, and we still had over 200 people in line waiting for food. People don't wake up in the morning saying, I want to be resilient. They're resilient because they have to be. They're resilient in the face of adversity. And the reason why these communities keep being named resilient communities, it is because they're always facing adversity. If you never have to face something harsh, no one recognizes you or notices you, right? So you're not seeing communities in, Rehoboth Beach, Delaware being termed resilient because they're not facing these things, right? It's the same communities over and over who pull themselves up by the bootstraps, who create these plans, who work through mutual aid and community to provide what they need amongst themselves outside of the realms of government, and they survive and they thrive. Yet these ideals, the things that they have learned to survive with or survive without, are not being brought to the table when it comes to energy justice, energy democracy for their communities. The government is deciding, oh, we're just going to put this thing here and we're going to say, this is good enough for you. This is going to help you. This is what you need. And that's simply not enough. So again, energy, an energy desert mean there's something not there. But these communities have an illusion of having everything that they need. And the only way we're going to truly be able to define that these communities are energy deserts is to go to those communities and talk with those people.
Montina.
Yet again, a mic drop by Roshetta. I don't even know what I can add to that. Just to be honest. But I'll tell you, and just from a personal kind of perspective, maybe more creative or what have you, because she really nailed it, right? But when I think about desert, I often think about, like in biblical terms, when people had to be in the desert and go through things, and kind of like Job type experiences, wandering around the desert, suffering. So that very concept of desert for me, just personally, always comes to my mind if I'm going to think about energy desert, right? And I think about communities living in our communities who are living in conditions where they may feel that they've just been forsaken, just left, right? Just left to suffer. Whether that is because the power goes out every time it rains, it seems, or because they have the electric bill is too high, hundreds of dollars, when other people who have more means, electric bills are not that high. Whatever the reason may be, from an energy injustice standpoint, it feel like, the concept that comes to my mind just personally is the concept of being in the desert, just left there, kind of to suffer. And until we have energy justice, a lot of people are suffering and should not be. So that's just kind of my kind of spin on it personally.
Khalil?
Yeah, absolutely. When I think about energy deserts, I think about a place that is difficult for you to survive in, right? And as Martina said, that's how many of our communities, have been have been left that have literally been declared sacrifice zones, by this country, by the local governments in particular. And what we've seen, even as we are seeing billions of dollars in new resources coming available through the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure law, more than half of the funds that's been allocated so far, that has been spent in Black communities, will actually increase pollution burdens, as well as emissions, in and around those communities. What we're seeing in places like Cancer Alley, which is near and dear to my heart, are communities who are essentially being told that yes, there's billions of dollars coming out for all this clean energy, wind and solar, et cetera, but that's not for you. The best that you can hope for is that your community get access to money, or money gets spent in your community for carbon capture storage. And so essentially what our communities are being told, uh, and in that context of a desert, is you don't have the option to plot another course. You don't have to have the option to build an alternative. You have to uh, be content with this state of living in a space that is difficult for you to survive in. And that's what we've been told over and over again. We see it in the tax credits that are going for energy efficiency, where in the billions that money is going towards upper income households, and barely a trickle of that into the millions maybe is going for low income households and communities of color. We see it, uh, you know, as Rashida said, Louisiana is preparing for another tropical storm hit, possibly will be upgraded to a hurricane before it hits landfall. The aftermath of those types of disasters, whereby Black households on average lose $20,000 in wealth post disasters, while white households, because of the spending formula within FEMA and the way post disaster resources are funneled and targeted towards certain communities, while other communities are neglected, white households see their net wealth increase by over 100,000 post disaster. And so again, our communities are told that we don't have the choice, we don't have the option, we don't have the resources, that we live in these hard to live spaces. And so when it's time for reconstruction development, post disaster development, our communities are doubly hit, because we're then said that, well, your community isn't worth the investment that these public dollars should go towards. So we see this this process repeat itself again and again.
Courtney, I just want to follow up to Dr. Khalil, if that's okay. I'm so glad he brought up some of the solutions that have been, kind of forced and dropped upon our communities, like carbon capture, like direct air capture. I know we're not specifically talking about these projects, but that's exactly what I was saying in my answer to the desert. It's like asking for water and they give you juice from Dollar General, right? Yeah, water is in that juice, but it's also all other sort of things, red dye and sugars and things that cause cancer. Like, yeah, we're gonna give you something. It's not gonna be what you asked for, and actually, it might actually harm you worse than what you already had. And so, to go to the question that's in the chat about what are some of the barriers of advancing energy democratization and community ownership of energy-based assets, one of those barriers is the color of our skin. It's the fact that we woke up black. It's the fact that our skin is not whiter than it is. It's the fact that we're full of melanin. Um, and because of that, if we go all the way back to slavery and we talk about Jim Crow and the fact that Southern states specifically still are very much rooted in Jim Crow laws and all of the redlining and these are things that are barriers, but also it's access, not having that access. When you think about the fact that even with agencies that have been put in place to provide resources after these climate induced disasters like hurricanes. So you think about agencies like FEMA, Federal Energy Management Agency. FEMA, you receive more assistance if you own your home. Now we look at statistics. Statistics show that fewer black and brown people own homes and own land than wealthier whiter people. So that's a limit to those resources. So this is what we're trying to break down when we talk about sacrifice zones is who's in these areas, how did they get here, what put us in this group, and who deemed us as a sacrifice. And that goes, all the way back. It didn't just start, it's just being monopolized. It's just being the problem is being piled upon. So we go from fighting against the railroads and the highways being built in our community to the dump sites and the petrochemical facilities and the plastic polluting facilities, and now the carbon capture and storage. And all of these things just keep getting piled in the same community, all saying this community lacks resources. This community is low income. So we're going to put this thing here and it's going to provide what they're lacking, but it's only polluting more, killing people more, and not giving them the basic, very basic needs that those communities have. So I just wanted to address that a little bit. Is it just it the answer is the color of our skin is the biggest barrier to those energy based assets.
Thank you all. Um, as we know, governmentally, energy is a hot button issue. It's one of those defining words. And I wanted to ask you all something. And I'll start by asking recently, well, not recently. So, author Matthew Desmond quoted, "It's expensive to be poor" in his book entitled Evicted: Poverty and Profit in the American City. We all know that they want, or the government is actually insisting that we all transition to renewable energy in some form or fashion, whether that's cars, whether that's homes, solar, like wind farms, what have you. So, why should lower income minorities consider renewable energy as opposed to fossil fuel homes? In the Black community, we often say it's a common theme that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So if my stove, which is gas based, still works, why should I choose something else? Why should I get on this bandwagon for renewable energy when I can't find an EV charger if I'm living in the South? Or if I have to pay triple what I do in energy bills if I have a solar panel on my house? It's not adding up and it's not beneficial for my pockets. So I'll leave that up to you guys. We can start with Roshetta.
I'm going to start with the words of the great Ella Baker since Dr. Khalil brought her up. And the quote says, One of the things that has to be faced in the process of waiting to change the system is how much we have got to do to find out who we are, when we have come from, and where we are going. So that's what it is for us. For Black people, especially in the South, a lot of things that we do are out of tradition, right? So when you were talking about the gas stove, for example, we know that in the South, again, in most of our communities, when it rains a little bit, we lose electricity. So we were taught you have a gas stove because if all the lights go out, you can still cook for your family. And so some of these ovens were passed down, just like the homes were passed down. These are gas, gas homes. Everything in there is run by gas. The hot water is run by gas. So whenever you think about the tradition, and we have to unlearn things, and it is a process, is what I'm getting to. It does not happen overnight. It does not happen overnight, and it does not happen without the people who have learned this process. So you can't sit in a room in DC and make decisions for community members who are living through this and who have come up with solutions. This is what I'm saying about people being at the table. These are thriving in their own way. They have figured out how to live in a place that lacks resources. Now, the way that they are surviving, those ways may be antiquated and it may be time to shift, but they don't trust the system because the system has lied to them over and over again, right? The system has said, come over here, we're going to test you for that, but instead we're injecting you with something. The system has said, like they did with Miss Fannie Lou Hamer, come over here, we're going to check to see if you have cancer, but instead they took all of her reproductive organs out and she couldn't have children. So we don't trust that system. The way you earn that trust, again, and I've said this in every answer, is to come to those communities, get to know the communities, get to know the people, have them at the table, and listen to them. If folks are telling you the reason I have this gas stove that may be killing me because it's releasing all of these toxins into my home, the reason I have it is because I know that if my lights go out, I can still feed my babies, I can still cook, then that sounds like a grid problem to me. Fix the grid and ensure them that they won't lose electricity, that they will still have their basic necessities met in this community. If you're coming to somebody's home and and you're telling them about solar panels on their roof and they're telling you they have a tarp on their roof, they don't even have a roof. It's not a solar. It's not the person don't want to know about solar. It sounds like they need some resources to build their homes more sustainable to ensure that they don't lose that roof in the next storm. You can't go. It reminds me of when I was in school or whenever we go to church on Sunday. If I'm sitting in the if I'm sitting in the pew and I'm hungry, I'm not listening to the pastor. I'm listening to my stomach. I'm thinking about those greens that are on the stove, that macaroni and cheese that I've cooked. That's what I'm thinking about. I'm ready to go home and eat. It's the same thing with communities. When you come to a community and you're talking to folks who are hungry, who don't know how they're going to pay their bills, who don't know how they're going to pay for childcare to go to work, they don't want to hear about solar. They don't want to hear about induction ovens. They couldn't care less about an EV car. People's basic needs have to be met first. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I always go back to this when you think about that triangle. If we're still at the bottom of trying to make sure we have clean air, clean water, and a safe home, we're never going to reach the level of actually being involved in the processes that make our communities and this world a better place because we're too busy concerned with putting out our own individual fires. We're too busy concerned with meeting our own basic needs. And so, in order to remedy that, it looks like making sure that community groups that are planted and who live in those communities, who are rooted in those communities, ensuring that they have the resources and the funding that they need to do that long-term work of going into those homes and getting to know the families and the people who live there and coming up with solutions as a community. It does not look like making a decision on a hill or in a brick building in a concrete jungle of New York and then saying, this is what we're going to do for that little community down in the South. And they're just going to have to take it whether they like it or not. It's never going to work. It never has worked.
Miss Martina.
Hard to add to that again, right? I guess just one little thing I would add to it too, in terms of, how do we persuade people, not to have that gas stove or what have you. Of course, at one level, it's about education, right? And showing folks that having that gas stove actually ends up being harmful to us, right? All the pollution that it emits, whether it's carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, all different forms of pollutants, which also hit us harder because our communities disproportionately already have a certain baseline of ill health, whether it's asthma or what have you, from being around all this polluting infrastructure. So it's about a piece of it, a slice of it is certainly an important slice, is education, right? And then, also adding the resources so that people can afford to switch out a stove. Nobody's going to do that if they can't afford to do it. But I want to also just take it to another level too. That's also very important. And it's all about, and again, Rochetta got to it in terms of, you got to think about people's basic needs. I see that as part of being um, a need to address this from a holistic perspective, right? And part of that holistic perspective is also political. So why is it that we have a difficulty with changing out our gas stoves, given how harmful they are to people, given how there's so many great studies and so much great information out there about it? Well, it's because of the power of the utilities, of the monopoly utilities, who have a vested interest in continuing to perpetuate the fossil fuel system, whether it's being reliant on coal-fired generation or gas-fired electric generation. They don't want you to take that gas stove out of your house because it suits their profits to keep this system and to keep maintaining and expanding this more expensive fossil fuel infrastructure system. So it's in part a political issue that we can't seem to get past all those, rosy commercials talking about how gas is natural and good for you because the utility has so much power. So in part, the solution has to also be political. In terms of, these utilities are propped up, of course, by our leaders, by the people that we elect. So in part, it has to be a political solution as well, so that we can be able to have people who represent us and not represent the interests of the utilities.
Khalil.
Yeah, thank you. I really like this conversation. So for this answer, Rochetta shared feedback from the household level, right? About how somebody could rationalize and make the decision like, I don't think this is right for me, or I'm just not ready because of all these issues. There's nuance to this story, right? Montina shared just now about the utilities. So let me share to you from where I sit, in one of these so-called big green organizations, right? And part of the problem from the way I see it, from where I sit, is a lot of the environmental movement, these big green organizations, the way that we approach these questions, particularly in Black communities and Latino communities, we say, oh, you having trouble with, police brutality or whatever issue that these communities are facing. Well, let me tell you about climate change. if if you think that's bad, let me tell you about, this or that. And so it's not, we're not approaching or we're not thinking about how we can leverage environmental and climate action to help communities to address the myriad of issues that they're already dealing with. How is this actually adding solutions to problems that communities are already facing? How are we, leveraging our efforts and our work, not just to reduce carbon emissions, but to address racial inequality? And we're trying to develop that kind of strategy right now. We have a project that's partnered with Policy League and a couple other organizations to leverage the Inflation Reduction Act and other federal resources, climate action resources to address racial wealth inequality. So that, we're beginning to think about, how can we use HUD resources to retrofit affordable housing, not just to reduce energy burdens even, or just to reduce carbon emissions, but how can we actually do it to build Black wealth, in their communities? And we have to really shift our thinking as an environmental movement, on how we think about climate change as a problem, and how we think about climate action as solutions that we want to build and develop that solve for much more than just reducing carbon emissions. We have to think of climate solutions that solve for the myriad of issues that our communities are facing. If we really want them to be a part of this movement and to feel some stake in it, and to feel that we hear what they are going through this transition.
Thank you. So, one of the things I would like to say is we, as you guys have all stated, we have climate issues, environmental health issues, energy issues, crime issues, housing issues. There's a plethora of things that we can address, and they're all connected to these environmental health and energy issues, and it's a little bit deterring. How do you continue the conversation? How do you bring this to the forefront of community meetings, of populations who already have so many other things to deal with? How do you address that when we don't want to talk about that, when we can't get a grocery store down the street? So what's the point of talking about energy? It's a bit depressing at the end of the day. It's sad. It's not helpful, and it's discouraging. So what do you say to those people who already struggle with so many other things, and how can you provide other solutions in addressing those suggestions when you have a government that's saying one thing and you may have a state that says another, and your bills don't add up? I'll start with Miss Montina first.
I think, in keeping with what we've been saying to some extent already, it's really important to have a holistic approach, right? So, I mean, again, Roshetta just hits it on the head. You don't go to somebody and talk about solar panels if they got a tarp on their roof, right? So you got to talk about the bigger picture, I think, right? And so you're going to couple this with how this helps them in the bigger picture. How, if you are able to get solar panels, once we have also addressed the fact that you're in, inadequate housing, that has to be part of it, right? I mean, the federal government level, we talk about an all of government approach. The Biden administration talks about that, right? That needs to happen too at the state level, right? So you're not just dealing with one thing in a vacuum, but looking how everything's interconnected. But be able to show people the benefits, right? It is depressing when we think about climate change. It is depressing when we think about all this pollution in our communities. It is depressing when we talk about environmental racism, because that is what it is. But when we talk about things that we can do to better ourselves in terms of saving money, in terms of making money, in terms of having control over our own energy systems, if we have, for instance, a community solar grid or microgrid, having self-determination, that is empowering. If we talk about having the ability to, even if you can't have the solar panel on your roof, say you're a member of a community solar project, and so that you're still going to get the benefit in some way, when your utility bill is going to go down. Imagine your utility bill going down to the point where you actually have a zero balance. You're actually in a position where you can sell back power to the utility, right? That's very empowering. That we're talking about some benefits. If we're talking about people having the ability to not only get great jobs working in some of these clean energy industries, that's empowering. If we're talking about people being able to own, in part or all, a new business and be entrepreneurial, then now we're talking. We're talking about business, and we're talking about benefits. So I think you got to take a holistic approach to it. You got to show people the benefits. And again, we have to make sure that none of this happens if we don't have local government that can make it happen, right? So we have to make sure we're electing the people who can see this vision and who bring us into making these plans and then implementing them. And again, bring us in a meaningful way, not just having some process and advertising it and say, well, that was engagement. No, actually really have people meaningfully engaged, having meetings, having processes such that people can actually attend them and participate, right? Not doing it during times of the day when people are working, right? So you got to have procedural justice as well. So you got to have the whole holistic approach, I think, to this.
Julio.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I think it goes back to what I was just saying in the way that we approach this. That and I think Montina encapsulated with don't talk about solar panels when someone has a tarp on their roof. But if you see the tarp on their roof, then you want to think about, okay, how can this energy policy, climate action, how can it help in that situation? And so, that's typically, the way that I approach it. But I think, stepping back, the bigger part of your question was just, because we are faced with so many different things, how do we avoid cynicism, depression, even, from dealing with all these things. And for me, it goes back to there's this quote from Zora Neale Hurston from Their Eyes Are Watching God, where she says, if we don't speak about our pain, they will kill us and say that we enjoyed it. And so to me, that is both a call to arms, but also, a call to action that, we have to continue, this fight. We have to continue to speak out, because if we give up, then we allow them to say that what they're doing to us is okay. And that can never be. And the last thing I would say, and Martina again kind of touched on it, we have the opportunity to make this clean energy economy in any way that we want to do it. We can make a clean energy economy that is completely monopolized by big corporations and big industry, the same way this fossil fuel economy is, that treats us not as self-interested communities and agents, as partners in this process, but treats us as consumers of energy services that we're just buying in, paying them. Or we can create a clean energy economy that is inclusive of us as owners and producers and creators and engineers, and thinkers. And so, we have to realize that opportunity. But it begins by first speaking of our pain, and making sure that the systems and that the processes that are making these decisions are aware of us, are aware of who we are, aware of what our needs are, aware of what our priorities are, aware of what our interests, what our vision, what our creativity is, so that as we're building out this system, it is fully accountable, to who we are and the type of world that we want to create.
Thank you. Roshetta.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Courtney. And of course, they've answered the question so graciously. And, I always try to think about that I'm speaking to community members and the people that I work with every day and the people where I live. And so when I think about this, it goes back to the reason why my organization, the Vessel Project of Louisiana, exists. The Vessel Project is a mutual aid environmental justice organization because we continue to say that these communities that we're talking about are low income communities that lack resources, but yet nobody is providing the essential resources for those communities. Like they're already starting at the bottom, right? But instead of lifting them up and providing those things and trying to mitigate the issue at hand, we just keep piling things on top of them. And the first problem hasn't been fixed, right? Like communities are saying, our water is brown, our water is poison. And instead of fixing the water and making sure they have clean water to drink, we're going to say, oh, we're just going to put this facility over here to capture carbon out of the ambient air. That doesn't fix the water problem. It also doesn't fix the pollution problem, but we put something there to pretend like we care, right? And so, my organization, what we recognize is because there's such a great need in the community did not have the capacity to accept the education that we were trying to provide about what the fossil fuel industry was doing. They did not have the capacity to even listen to the fact that these facilities that they assumed were employing people and providing resources were actually contributing to the pollution and the bad water and the fact that they didn't have the things that they need because these facilities don't pay taxes. So It goes to mutual aid. And many people ask me all the time, how does mutual aid play a role in environmental justice? Because through mutual aid, we are providing what is needed in the community. If the community is asking for water, we're providing water. We're not going to give you a box of Lay's potato chips if you ask for water. We're giving you exactly what it is you're asking for. And because it's mutual, those same people, they get on board and they say, well, how can I help this community member? What can I do? How can I be a part of this? How can I volunteer? And that turns into folks showing up at community meetings, listening, understanding, being a part of the conversation, coming up with solutions, attending hearings, attending Climate Week, participating in massive marches of over 75,000 people in the streets of New York City. It turns into getting a ban on LNG, or it turns into all of these big things that we're fighting for. But it starts at the community level. So if these funds are opened up, if resources are opened up on the government level, they have to get down to those community groups who are doing the work. And that is the way we're going to get to. That's the way we're going to solve it. We have to start at the very bottom and help the people who are most in need and provide those most basic needs. Ensure that they have clean air, clean water, and that their homes are safe. And we do that within the community. And then that grows. It grows out of the community, right? So again, Vessel Project right now, we're in the midst of this hurricane preparedness, whatever we're doing. Some of us are under a tropical storm warning, some of us are under hurricane warning here. But we've been empowering the community, providing resources on how to prepare. We have been making sure that we are working together and we have a communication and a check. So we've developed this system. This system is working. People along the system have what they need. And those same people, again, are now like, well, Rashetta, our local government didn't have a plan. What can we do about it? And guess what? Now I have about 30 people who are saying, I want to be at the city council meeting at the next city council meeting. People who wouldn't have been there, but because they didn't have the resources that they needed during this storm prep, they see who provided it. Now they're like, I want to go and attend that. And that's the way we're going to change. We have to think outside of the box and outside of the ways we've been doing things for so long. We also have to unlearn that, we only are entitled to a small piece of the pie. This whole thing belongs to us. We all are entitled to so much of it. I don't know if it ended. I don't know what
Oh no, you
happened,
can keep going.
but okay, but yes, and so once we can get people to that very basic level of having their needs met, then people move up to that next tier and they get involved and they get active and then they move up again and they become the givers and the doers and the people who are making their community better. You're looking at an example right here. 5 years ago, I was on Section 8. I was getting Medicaid. I was on all the government benefits there are. But because people believed in me, they supported me, they listened to me, I went back to school. I then got a better job. And once I got a better job, I no longer qualified for those programs. And then once I got enough funding with my organization, I reached back and I hired 7 people from the community who were also facing those things as single parents and folks who were fighting for the community. And that's the way it goes because if we can lift up the very bottom, everybody else rises too, right? It's like a glass of water. It rises from the bottom. So we can no longer keep supporting that top 831%. The number changes. We have to reach down to the bottom level of these communities and make sure that those folks have the support and resources that they have, and those same people will continue that cycle. That's just what works.
Thank you so much. I know that we have only a few more minutes, so I just wanted to thank you all for your responses. Thank you all for your presence. Because the answers were amazing, and I know that I can keep asking questions, but I want to give some other people some time. So, one of the questions that we have is, what are some significant barriers of advancing energy democratization? electrification and community ownership of energy based assets? And are there strategies that have shown to be somewhat successful? Let's start with Khalil.
Yeah, that's a big question. I'll try to be quick. So the first one is always going to be money, financing. Having the resources to finance community ownership. One of my biggest fears from all of the money coming out from IRA is that we're going to use that money, and in Black communities and in Latino communities, we're going to be pushing solar leasing instead of ownership on those communities. So we're going to be using all this public funds so that people could be leasing panels. But money is the first one. The second piece, uh, and I wish Tony was here to talk more about this as well, is the technical capacity to be able to manage solar arrays. We need people not only to install them, that's like the lowest level job that you can have, but to manage them, to do maintenance on them going forward. In many of our states, particularly where Black people live, we are more likely to live in states that are hostile to this industry. And many of these states have preemption laws that don't allow communities to create community solar projects in a way that can both reduce the costs, that can expand the scale, and that can provide different types of economic opportunities for communities to come together, to organize together around solar. And so there are a myriad of issues that create barriers to our investment. And we have to, just continue to push through them each one by one.
Montina.
Yeah, I'll also be, and Khalil hits it on the head. I'll also be brief though, and just reiterate what I mentioned before. The kind of things that he just talked about, and if we're going to have community ownership, if we're going to have that model, the policies have to support that, right? Because, like he said, in some places you can't even, it's prohibitive in the legal structure right now. So we must have the policies to support it. So we need to have the politics in place to be able to elect the people and appoint the people that we want, who will make sure that we will be able to do that model because money is there, whether it's coming from the green bank money. There's all kind of money that's out there. We have to get the money, but the money's there. There's no lack of money, right? It's just about us accessing it. So I always come back to the political piece because I think it's a real reality on the ground. So we have to have the policies in place to enable that model, as well as the technical, and the access to the money.
Rashida.
I'm gonna be brief, Courtney, and I'm just gonna name them because we've named them throughout this whole talk. But equitable access, participation, making sure that people know about what's going on, can get to the meetings, can assess those meetings to contribute their voice and their suggestions. Environmental justice. We talk about what we're fighting against is the injustice, but we don't even have the justice principles in place to know how to fight against the injustices that we're facing. They're not in place in communities. They're on paper, people know in their minds, and they assume that communities know that they're facing environmental injustices, but the communities don't know. They're just living, they're just surviving. Sustainability. Again, our if our grid goes off and our lights go off every time it rains, that is not sustainable. It's not sustainable to continuously rely on your neighbors either, is it? Because they're in that same community and they're struggling as well. So, sustainability, affordability, having funds to travel to these meetings who may be, miles down the street, or you have children and you have to worry about daycare or what you're going to feed them. You don't have the funding or the access to funds. Community empowerment. If everybody in the community going through the same thing, everybody going through the same thing. Like everybody is worried about their own individual issues. So they don't have the capacity to come together and say, we're going to fight this thing because I got to go to work. I got to watch my kids. I got to watch my grandkids. I got to feed my children. So that community empowerment needs to be in place. We need a transition support team. We talk about a just transition, but what does that look like? Again, we can't just go in expecting everybody to put their gas stoves to the side of the road, and they have not been properly educated to understand what that gas stove is doing to them. So what does that just equitable transition from gas to these induction ovens look like for a community. We need those type of things in place and overall support to make sure, because communities are not only dealing with all of these injustices, right? But they're also dealing with undiagnosed mental issues, undiagnosed health issues, all of these things, and they're trying to just survive. They're trying to thrive. They're trying to live. So overall support needs to be in place. And to the part of the question that's asked, what has worked? What has worked has been bringing community people to the table and those community people telling their story. Storytelling works. Also, what works is reminding people what they're fighting for. If we talk so much about the negative and what we're fighting against and what we don't want, it's heavy, it's draining, it's a lot. So, reminding people about the fact that here in Louisiana, we're fighting for crawfish. We love crawfish. We don't want to have a shortage of crawfish. It brings people to the table when we remind people that we're fighting to continue to have festivals in hopes that the streets don't get flooded or that the coastline doesn't get wiped away. It helps to bring people to the table because they want to have those Mardi Gras festivals, reminding people that we're not just fighting against something, that we're fighting for something, incorporating some joy and listening to the people who are most impacted. That is what has worked, and that is what will continue to work as long as those people in the community have the resources, the funding, and the support that they need.
Thank you. I want to start off by saying thank you so much, Roshetta. Thank you, Montina. Thank you, Khalil. You guys were absolutely amazing. We have reached the end of our session, and it has been a complete and utter extraordinary experience for me, and I'm sure for the rest of our audience. I have so many more questions, and I'm sure they do too. But unfortunately, we don't have enough time. I will recommend we get more time next time because you guys have been amazing and very thought provoking and very honest and transparent. And that's what we need in today's society. So I thank you. I thank you for teaching me as well as all the audience members. If they knew nothing else, they have learned a entirety or in a plethora of knowledge. So thank you. Thank you so much to our audience members for your participation, for your kindness in choosing us as the option for your hour. And we look forward to talking to you in the near future. Thank you guys. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. And bring us back next year with Tony this time.
Right. Are we exiting now or are